next speaker is somebody, I don't know if who follows me on Twitter. Some people say on Twitter, my personal Twitter, the drone dealer, I do what I call unfiltered. If anyone follows that. And some people go, man, that Egan guy's a jerk, whatever. I don't really care. And then so I have some people that I also kind of work with on Twitter. And in working with them, I mean that we're trying to keep some of the industry, let's say, honest. And Kevin now works for Department 13. They're doing some counter UAS stuff, but Kevin's been in the dronosphere for a while. He's, well, I think I'm just going to let him tell the story. Please welcome Kevin Finister.
All right, so while this content loads, I'm Kevin Finister. I work for Department 13. I work on a counter drone platform known as Mesmer. And Mesmer is intended to give you situational awareness over a geographical area with regards to what RC aircraft or drones are operating, and subsequently give you some mitigation options to alter the fact that they're in your airspace. Before I talk about what I'm going to discuss, I want to point out that this is my commentary explicitly. It's not affiliated with Department 13 directly. It doesn't represent their views or attitudes of anybody I work with or any of our clients. The link to this talk has been posted on my Twitter account. I think Patrick's also posted as well if you want to follow along so that you can read a little bit better. This is a controversial discussion. If you're not comfortable with that, it might be a good time to go ahead and find something else to do for a little bit. A lot of these slides are primarily for my own visual aid. If you look closely, there may be some little Easter eggs in them that are fun to discuss. This one is Chris Anderson talking about drones delivering aid in Syria as an example. This is not a technical talk. I'm going to discuss social norms today, and we should all be familiar with social norms. These are things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis as we go throughout life. And when you deviate from a social norm, you might be subject to ridicule from your peers and other consequences. So an example of a norm being used for influence, recently we've all been asked to take into account cultural norms as we consider a stance on drone ID. I'm not going to discuss that specifically, but it's a good example of a cultural norm. Norms are also things that can change depending on when they come up, who you're discussing them with. And if you don't see what I'm pointing out here, this is actually Brendan Schulman from DJI a few years back discussing that he thought that IDs for drones were kind of a higher standard than general aviation. So it's kind of funny to see them pushing drone ID for the rest of us now in hindsight. Another norm that a lot of us are familiar with is the if you see something, say something norm. If something's suspicious, you should pipe up and mention it to law enforcement or whoever's appropriate. So this is kind of like me seeing something and saying something by discussing this openly today. The flip side of that is norms can counter each other. In some circles, you might have a no snitching norm, which is don't discuss things openly. So norms may depend on where you come from and what circles you're in as far as to how they apply. As I was coming up for content with this talk, or trying to come up with content for this talk, I ran across this cartoon that I felt really shaped where we are as an industry right now. And I feel like all of us have that one friend that when you're at a party, they have no problem, dipping the chip down into the sauce and, eating it and then dipping right back in there. And, at the end of the day, even if you roll turds around all day, you got to have some standards. So this conversation, if you haven't figured out, is centering on non-proliferation of UAVs. And this is actually a GAO study from a couple years back on their opinion on the subject. Anytime non-proliferation is brought up, somebody inevitably mentions Toyota. So this is your mandatory Toyota Supra full of puppies to represent the drones for good side of the argument. I really think that Toyota isn't necessarily the best example for an analogy to this stuff. It's close. It's kind of like oranges to kumquats. They're citrus. They're the same family, but it's really not the same thing. And we've all heard the the adage, close like horseshoes and drone drop hand grenades. So I feel this is really an obtuse conversation, partially because of the fact that some of the export laws specifically exclude trucks. So when you're talking about a Toyota truck as an argument against non-proliferation of drones, you've kind of got an instant conversation non-starter. While I was trying to research this subject, I couldn't help but notice a number of parallels in a movie that I had seen recently called Lord of War with Nicolas Cage. And in this movie, the main character winds up confronting the morality of his work. And I feel like that's kind of where we are in an industry. There's a lot of things that people don't like to discuss, but at the end of the day, there are some really interesting morality questions that we should look at. I felt that there's a lot of parallels in this movie and in the industry, and in particular, DJI more recently. And if you paid attention to the news, you've seen that they've been in a position to where they've had to comment that they didn't particularly want to be in an arms race with regards to how people use their equipment. And unfortunately, whether or not they like it, the simple concept of geo, that is an arms race. You're there whether or not you like it. So, if you look at Tiananmen Square or Iraq, again, that conversation is kind of questionable in my mind. One part of the problem with this is as of recently, DJI has actually quietly introduced no-fly zones into their software. So the fact that they didn't tell us about it publicly is kind of interesting in my mind. For one reason, it's actually impacted people that are in these regions trying to use these aircraft for documentary purposes. And despite the fact that there's supposed to be mechanisms in place to allow people to unlock these geo restrictions, a number of people are saying that DJI is not replying to them for whatever reason. And depending on where you are, these restrictions can appear in a number of ways, including blocking your video, preventing your ability to take off or fly. And at this point, it's ultimately unclear how far DJI can actually exercise their ability. I've noted, for example, there's a number of different levels of no-fly zones, and depending on where you are, your ability to turn those off may or may not exist. And so what we've seen as a result are journalists, for example, in Iraq that are doing things like wrapping their aircraft in tinfoil as a mechanism to get around these no-fly zone restrictions because they can't get a hold of DJI to unlock them for them. You've also, we're seeing the hacker community step in and start taking apart the firmware. It's been found that recent DJI products are actually based on Android, and folks have gone in and figured out a way to bypass the 500-meter height restrictions that are imposed under a number of situations. And specifically, they've also gone in and found in the firmware updates where the offsets to the various no-fly zones are, and have discussed how to bypass those as well. So from a status quo standpoint, this is a really interesting point in time where we're at. I don't envy the position that DJI is in as the number one drone manufacturer, having to answer to their customers as far as their responsibilities morally and socially. But before I dig into that too much, I want to talk about kind of how we got here. So if you've been in this community long enough, you've inevitably seen DIY drones. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the logo used to be a Predator. A NASA Ecana drone. And one of the developers is here pointing out the mere fact that has to be explained to people that have been in this industry is part of the problem with that being the logo for that community. Chris Anderson would go out of his way to point out that there were no weapons on it. Another number of other people would go out of their way to point out that it's perhaps not the best logo for the community in general. And part of the title of my talk was How to Fray a Community. And in particular, Chris Anderson and a number of other people would speak up and say that we should not discuss these things because it's going to fray our community. After 6 years at this point, I kind of argue otherwise. We should be talking about this stuff. So in efforts to keep this conversation quiet and censored, a lot of times the discussions were flat out deleted and removed from the forums and whatnot. So even if you go to look and see what people thought about this stuff, you can't even find it. So a lot of people thought that this discussion really didn't apply to them. It was kind of one of those, this isn't me, these aren't the drones that you're looking for, let's talk about something else. Nonetheless, the DIY drones logo underwent a number of changes. And here I'm highlighting some of the differences in the logo that, they went through to kind of make it less threatening, as it were. So again, fast forward a couple of years and people are still having the conversation that, this is still too offensive of a logo. The developers were to the point to where it was kind of a cliche conversation for them, and they were piping up saying things like, maybe we should change the name to DIY unmanned aerial vehicles or DIY flying vehicles, which is obviously kind of taking a jab at the name drone in DIY drones. And John R. Berkland here is specifically saying that, this is kind of a result of a lot of the media silliness, as it were. Looking at where we're at now, I think some of that media silliness wasn't necessarily silly. So this was a lather, repeat, rinse conversation on this forum. And if you look today, the old Predator drone is gone, and we have a much less offensive logo. I feel bad pointing this out, but if you look at one of the elements in the logo now, it's actually strikingly similar to something that we're seeing pop up in theaters. So might be time for a new logo revision. Nonetheless, I come from back when ArduPilot Mega used to have a UCAV directly on the PCB, so it's kind of like, whatever. The logo semantics are semantics. After about version 2.5 of ArduPilot, that logo actually is no longer on the PCB. So for me, this is kind of the plateau of the mixed messages that we were sending as a community with regards to the militarization of our hobby. Chris Anderson got up at DEF CON and discussed open sourcing the military-industrial complex and literally snickered and asked what could go wrong. Look over in Mosul right now. That's pretty much what can go wrong with this stuff. If you haven't seen Eisenhower's talk, you should probably watch it. I'm not going to show it here. But basically, the discussion was about the military-industrial complex being the fact that there are bits of our military that are vital to peacekeeping. So I don't know what Chris was trying to say, but I don't think that was what he was really trying to imply. Nonetheless, there are some interesting lines of commentary in that talk, specifically that the military-industrial complex can be abused. And I think that's kind of where we're at now with the bits of our hobby that people are using maliciously. So again, as far as the mixed messages go, it's really interesting that the community hasn't wanted to discuss the fact that this goes on, and we want to delete and censor and keep people from talking about it. So if you look at the developers that worked in the ArduPilot project, they had spoken up publicly and said, hey, we don't want our code to be weaponized. We want it used for civilian uses. And unfortunately, there's not really much you can do. Your code's going to get assimilated and wind up wherever it winds up. So for those of you that don't get that, this is the Locutus aboard. Chris Anderson happens to look like Neil Patrick Stewart. So if you look at Chris Anderson around the time that developers were saying that stuff, you'll see that they were debuting the platform as one of the first civilian drone mission capable platforms that had run off of a USS aircraft carrier, which again, talking about mixed messages, that's pretty much the peak of it right there. The mission that they showed was in a naval harbor, obviously with battleships and whatnot. At the end of the day, it was kind of night at the museum. This specific aircraft carrier does have some military history, but it was literally a decommissioned museum piece at that point. In tandem with this, the Naval Postgraduate School was making use of the ArduPilot firmware for some swarming exercises. And also the Army Tests and Evaluation Command was making use of the 3D Robotics X8 platform. So again, these are a lot of mixed messages in my mind to see Chris getting up on yet another battleship discussing the Arducopter and ArduPilot platform. And in particular, this specific speech on the USS Midway, he was taking jabs and kind of trolling the USS military with regard to his capability versus theirs, which is just really weird to see. Again, night at the museum at this point. The Midway does have some military history, but again, it's a decommissioned museum piece in San Diego at this point. Also along this time frame, Chris Anderson was talking about the Syria Airlift Project. and pointing out that this was a humanitarian aid situation. And if you haven't looked at the Syria Airlift Project, it's certainly worth a historic look. They were trying to, quote, end starvation and medical deprivation as a weapon of war. There were some real interesting things that I think we learned as a community out of that project. One was that statistical averages are more important than individual airplanes. And if you look at Mosul right now, I think somebody had commented that there was like 52 or 56 drone sorties in one day that somebody had dealt with. And that pretty well speaks to those statistical averages right there. Another thing is that extreme reliability was something that they found was necessary. So you're going to need a platform that's reliable and repeatable and all that sort of stuff, and you can figure out where that points pretty quickly. The problem that I had with this Syrian airlift project was that Syria is on the list of export-controlled countries, so it's weird for me to see people pushing drone and UAV equipment into Syria when they're directly listed on ITAR and other export-controlled laws. Also, Chris was talking about the Ukraine. He had no problem posting this Ukrainian garage air force that was making use of PIXHAWK. And again, if you look back, I believe the Ukraine is in the middle row there on a sanctioned country. So again, we're sending a lot of mixed messages as a community. Why would you be basically censoring people from discussing this while all the while touting the fact that stuff is used in a war zone? It doesn't make any sense at all. And again, even if you go back to some of the early articles on this, in probably one of the more famous articles about Chris Anderson and 3D robotics, it's directly mentioned that companies like DJI are putting out military-capable equipment for $1,000. I mean, were we all just grinning and nodding? I don't know. So back to the movie that I mentioned in the beginning, there was a key point in the movie where one of the main characters speaks up and says to the other main character that you need to be careful with these things that you're selling because they kill. And it's an unfortunate reality. That's where we're at in the industry right now. Some of the stuff that we sell or some of the things that we use as a weekend hobby are enabling people to do malicious things. I've really seen some of this stuff before. A lot of you don't necessarily know my background, but I come from a computer security background. I used to sell weaponized vulnerabilities and computer zero-day, basically. So I've been through some of these morality questions with regards to my work and my equipment being used for good and bad, so to speak. There's a lot of money in that industry, and this is out of a paper early on before a lot of people were even aware that there was a vulnerability industry. But we had problems with double dipping in our industry as well. And people would actually take vulnerabilities and sell them to three-letter agencies as exclusive, turn around and sell them to another agency or group as exclusive. And you're selling these things for high dollar to people that think that they're the only people that have this stuff. So I think you can see the obvious morality issue there. So the way you can relate that back down to drones is, obviously, if we don't want drones in malicious people's hands, you can be darn sure that the vendors and manufacturers are going to say that this is going to drive up prices because that impacts our bottom line as far as how and where we sell. But for me, I don't think you can blame me for my mistrust of some of the stuff that I'm seeing right now. Because in the computer security industry, what we wound up with was some of our tools were going to enable repressive regimes and actually used to help silence political dissidents. And that's not something you really want to see at the end of the day. Back to that movie that I mentioned, there was a point in which Nick Cage is discussing something with an arms dealer, and his comment is that you're not a true nationalist until you've supplied weapons to kill your own countrymen. And anybody that's selling drone gear, think about that. Seriously, think about it. At one point there were restrictions that were put on 3D robotics, and some of the people were piping up saying that they were pointless. And I don't mean to pick on Rob here. He's really easy to quote because he was a developer at the time, and he was one of the people that wasn't subject to the censorship and deletions of his posts. So some of his comments are easier to find than other people's. So in 2014, he had said, we've not seen a single person killed or hurt by a UAV attack. And that was the public knowledge at that point in time. Fast forward to today, and you look at the Islamic State's drone documents, and they're directly mentioning APM or ArduPilot Mega. So this is kind of hard to look at. A lot of people know I'm a troll, so I apologize if this offends you, but this is reality right now. The Islamic State is going to Hobby King and using Pixhawk and ArduPilot code to do things that we don't really care for them to be doing. And at one point, I thought I even spotted a mission planar fork in one of the ISIS videos, which it is what it is. So if you look back historically, maybe these were the drones that we were looking for. This should have been a conversation that we had a long time ago instead of brushing it off and deleting it and acting like it didn't exist. There was a point when 3D robotics did actually get hit with export restriction. A lot of people didn't understand what was going on. But if you look at the comments that were made and you look at the laws that are out there, this is basically a result of the Washner arrangement. And this is something that directly impacts the computer security industry right now as well. There's discussions about are computer vulnerabilities something that should be subject to these sort of export controls. So Chris had mentioned specifically there were 44 countries that they could now ship ArduPilot or ArduCopter 3D Robotics product to. And if you look back at that last slide, that directly corresponds with the folks in the Washner arrangement. One very smart forum user had asked at that point in time, does that mean that people that resell 3D robotics gear shouldn't be selling to countries where these things don't belong? And I think that's a very good question. So I'm not going to botch Bill's last name, but Bill P. from the UAV Dev Board Project, one of the very early pioneers in this hobby, if you will, mentioned that he went through this stuff as well. And he actually piped up and mentioned to Chris and SparkFun both that this is something that they would need to pay attention to and deal with. And unfortunately, I believe the comment was that Chris thought that this wasn't something that applied to him. So I'm going to stop banging on 3D robotics, and we're going to spread the love a little bit and change gears to DJI a little bit. And part of the reason I wrote this talk was because I wanted to know what was actually behind why we're seeing so much DJI gear deployed in theater. It's weird to me. Again, going back to the export restrictions and stuff like that. There's of course some plausible deniability there, so we're not going to necessarily go into that. As far as how stuff gets there and whatnot. But for me, I feel like if you turn a blind eye and choose not to look at something, then of course you're not going to speak up about it either. So I have a problem when I can literally get on Google and search buy DJI Inspire Mosul and get a list of places where I can buy stuff. So some people are clearly turning a blind eye to the fact that this stuff occurs. So I had done some Google searching and found out who ran this particular website, and I copied them and some individuals from DJI on Twitter and specifically asked, like, am I actually seeing what I'm seeing here? Can you actually have stuff shipped to Mosul? And they responded that, we operate a marketplace platform as one of our lines of business, and we don't have a direct relationship with DJI. And as one of my Twitter followers pointed out, that was some very specific wording that they used in their response. I did some searching and actually found a little bit earlier in the year, DJI actually asked ArduPilot, which was this company that I had found when you're doing the web searches, to come see them out at some at some event where they were, demonstrating the technology and whatnot. So again, it's funny when you look at it. I figured I would ask this ArduPilot company to clarify, again, am I actually seeing that your marketplace platform can enable users to sell DJI equipment in Mosul or Iraq? Well, that's the Catch-22, and if you haven't seen that movie, I've linked it here where the Catch-22 is described. It's pretty obvious to me. I mean, I can look right at their webpage and see that it cost me $106 to ship to Iraq with, an estimated delivery date of whatever. The price is a little bit high, but, hey, I guess it'll get there. And again, some of these places would blatantly say, hey, we don't ship to Iraq, but this page would give you a list of alternative shippers. So apparently this VM Smart Home in the UK would be more than happy to ship you a Mavic within the next 12 days to Iraq for $1,800. So again, it is what it is. Or you can get it from other closer countries that are in the area. But this ArduPilot space was kind of like a one-stop shop rather, and you can even get your shuttlecocks if you need them. So of course, me discussing this stuff didn't wind up with any answers. I just got blocked on Twitter by the people that ran ArduPilot and owned it and whatnot. But I'm kind of persistent. I like to keep asking questions. So I figured I'd ask DJI directly. If theoretically I happened to be in Mosul and I was flying an Inspire and I broke a prop, is there a repair center around? They were happy to give me the link of where I could buy, which would tell me the places in the area. I don't think they fully understood the question, but so I had to ask again, how do I find this stuff? And they piped up and said, hey, there's no enterprise DJI dealer in Mosul, which that was comforting to know. So nonetheless, again, asking these kind of questions basically gets me blocked and I don't wind up with any answers. So again, I'm beating a dead horse at this point, and I'm going to keep beating it a little bit. So Brendan Schulman is DJI's VP of Policy and Legal Affairs for DJI. So you would think that he would be aware of some of these things. This is his intro video that I'm not going to show. But in this intro video, he actually makes a couple of comments that I want to take apart. One of them is that he is not aware of customers who have tried to weaponize their drones. They don't support that. And then he goes into his standard deflection, blah, 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 drones for good. It's like, okay, whatever. Additionally, he goes on to say that realistically, nobody is doing persistent surveillance with drones today. And I don't know how you can even say that stuff straight-faced. Again, so that I'm not misquoting him, this is that actual video. You can watch it in your own time. But when I take this apart, I see as a company, you're marketing your product, you have a sphere of influence, you have direct and indirect customers that are ultimately purchasing your product. The definition of weaponized, I don't really think we all need to go over the semantics of that, and we've all seen weaponized DJI product. If you say that you haven't, you're lying. If not, go to Google, it'll take you 2 seconds to find one. As far as persistent surveillance, if you look at the DTIC.mil definition of persistent surveillance, or even if you look at the dictionary definition of persistent surveillance, I think it would be extremely hard to argue that what we're seeing in war zones right now with DJI products isn't the equivalent of persistent surveillance. It is what it is. So in this line of conversation, a number of people pointed out, as I mentioned, that DJI might be the equivalent of Toyota for drones. Some people might think that's a little harsh. But in reality, DJI has drawn this comparison on their own as well when speaking to the news media. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to kind of break down the semantics of this Toyota argument that people like to bring up. And part of that is the Hilux is of course one of the popular Toyota products that people like to weaponize. And the argument is that some DJI products are the equivalent of the Hilux of the skies. And if you don't understand that, there's basically a war dubbed the Toyota War because Toyota's equipment was kind of pivotal in either side ability to take advantage of specific skirmishes and whatnot. And there's been a number of conflicts in which Toyota vehicles have been that force multiplier, if you will. So to the point that recently the U.S. Treasury has actually asked, how did ISIS get a hold of so many of these trucks? And Toyota's kind of been like, I don't know. And so in that regard, I feel like DJI and Toyota actually are. They're two peas in a pod. It is a good analogy in that regard. But when you start looking at some of the comments that have been made in the news, it gets a little interesting. Toyota has said, for example, it's impossible for any automaker to control indirect or illegal channels through which their vehicles could be misappropriated, stolen, or resold. Well, the flip side of that argument is they've also come out and said that they have a strict policy to not sell vehicles to potential purchasers that would use or modify them for paramilitary or terrorist activities. I don't know that I've seen DJI make that statement publicly. It would be nice if they did. So going back to that movie Lord of War, there was a point at which there were some attack helicopters basically being sold, and what they wound up doing was removing the missile pods and putting them, just a little bit away. And a weapons inspector winds up on this ship, and Nick Cage's character says, hey, look, dude, we both know the law. This stuff is going to different places, different customer, it is what it is. He was exploiting the semantics of humanitarian aid, if you will, to move equipment that could be used maliciously, technically. So I think you'd be a fool to think that there weren't DJI Phantoms sitting in the same shipping containers with these servo drop mechanisms. And of course, we all know that these servo drop mechanisms are for humanitarian aid to drop water and give everybody drinks and stuff. But what we're seeing in Mosul, and I think I might let this one play, is we're seeing this is the Iraq Defense Force, or one of the good guys, as it were, taking a DJI Inspire and fitting it with some sort of munition, basically a grenade. And they're using these same servo droppers that I just showed you for water and other nice things. There you go, there's a good shot of the grenade rounds there. And they're using these to target ISIS militants and do what you do with grenades, as it were. But there's plenty of these videos floating around, if you look, of DJI Matrix 100s and other aircraft that are being armed in this fashion. So again, to see that statement, I'm not aware of our customers weaponizing our aircraft. Just kind of like, what rock have you been living under? So again, even DJI Phantoms are used for this sort of stuff, and it's difficult to see. It is what it is. So in this line, Toyota has popped up and said, we have procedures and contractual commitments in place that help prevent our products from being diverted to unauthorized military uses. And again, I don't know that I've seen DJI say this specifically. It would be something that was nice if they came out and said. I recognize the fact that there is a need for authorized military use. So at this point, though, I really feel like we're kind of in this Clive Barker Hellraiser situation where we're in an overrated flick about Pandora's box. I mean, it's open at this point. It's really difficult to control those things once they're proliferated. And if you look around, there's no shortage of people that are interested in helping you get DJI products, and to be fair, other products into war zones for whatever use. So again, going back through old news snippets and whatnot, Toyota has piped up and said that any products that you're seeing in these zones are likely from neighboring countries, and they're coming through unofficial channels. And you'll see even the Iraqi ambassador to the U.S. piped up at one point and said, this is a question that we've been asking of our neighbors. How is this stuff getting here? Why is this happening? If you guys haven't seen it, there's a great Viceland episode called The Tunnels of Gaza, and they outline some of these covert supply lines that are in war-torn countries and whatnot. And I almost imagine guys running through these tunnels with these DJI Matrix 100s, getting them to the front line and whatnot. So I don't think that DJI is intentionally trying to profit from this necessarily, but as people have pointed out with Toyota, this is something that they should be able to figure out. How are these drones getting in theater? And that's something that they should disclose, and it's something that they should try to put a stop to if they haven't. And in my opinion, this isn't anything new. Vehicles and things get stolen all the time to the point to where people use bait vehicles and other techniques to track supply line infiltration and whatnot. And as Toyota pointed out specifically, they've briefed the U.S. Treasury on their procedures that they have in place for supply line integrity. And again, I don't know that DJI has done this. Maybe they have, but they haven't necessarily publicly discussed it. So in one of these articles, one thing that was mentioned as a potential stopgap or some way to keep an eye on some of this was the fact that serial numbers can be used to reveal where drones have been purchased. And when I look at that on the surface, it's kind of funny to me because we've all had to register DJI drone at some point in time. And these are tied back to accounts on DJI servers. So the fun thing about this is when you actually perform that activation, your serial number is sent to one of DJI's servers. So this activation is actually recorded and tied back to your drone specifically. If you go to the web page that request is made to, I think they've inadvertently left their API documentation up, which gives us an opportunity to read a little bit about some of their capabilities. And what I noticed right off the bat is that it appears as if there's some mechanisms by which they can tie customer info back to serial numbers. In particular, customer name, possibly in some cases. And what appears to be even the sales channel at some point. So, if you're doing a law enforcement request, obviously that's very valuable information to know because it might give you a good channel back to recognize an individual that's using a craft maliciously. So the problem with this is that some of the forensics SMEs like myself, this is David Kovar, have tried to work with DJI to understand how these serial numbers work, and we get a lot of conflicting information from them, unfortunately, and in some cases stuff that's flat out incorrect. David had asked if there were ways that could link the serial numbers back to a customer, and was flat out told no, and he actually found that that wasn't a correct statement. So you can almost equate this back to a serial number on a gun. There's a lot of aircraft that are going down in theater, and I'm wondering who's collecting these serial numbers, and ultimately if there's any accountability for where the purchases have been made and that sales channel, as it were. But I really think it's a great start because that serial number, as you use the app, is randomly talking back to DJI's server and sending that serial number up. So again, if you're a law enforcement officer and you're looking to request data from DJI that might be related to an end user, it appears as if they may have information that they could share about where people are using things and violating geofences and things of that nature. So this comment isn't from Toyota specifically, but it's from somebody that was commenting on Toyota, and they mentioned that equipment like Toyota Hiluxes are force enablers. And to a certain extent, you can expect that those trucks are going to be mounted with machine guns and other types of military equipment. So that sends me back to DJI saying, hey, we're like Toyota. I don't necessarily know that that's the message that they want to be conveying, that we should expect to a certain extent their gear to show up in theater and ultimately be equipped with military implements like guns and grenades or whatever. So no, at the end of the day, they're not actually supplying ISIS directly with this equipment, of course. It's just that the terrorists are flying the most popular aircraft in the region, as it were. So in the line of Toyota commentary, people often bring up the fact that most of the vehicles that you see appear to be older models. They're 10 to 15 years old. And, so if you take statistical averages and you do some math, that ultimately what you can expect is to see a lot of white Toyotas deployed in theater. So maybe you can equate that to the old white Phantom 2s. There's so many of them out there, it's probably easy for them to show up in theater. For me, though, I've got questions about some of the newer stuff that we're seeing in theater, like the Matrix 100s. Those are expensive craft, and it's weird to me to see them in basically export-controlled countries. So, a lot of people have piped up and said that there's literally too many of these to be stolen, and that's in regard to Toyota specifically, and I'm feeling the same way about DJI to a certain extent, but again, I don't really know what the situation is. So Toyota's tried to own some of this commentary to a certain extent, and they've said that this isn't their proudest product placement, but that basically the Taliban is looking for the same qualities that any truck buyer is looking for, and that's kind of what DJI is basically implying. And at a certain point, weaponized Toyota trucks became known as technicals. And I'm starting to wonder if we should start calling these technicals, because it's pretty much it is what it is. So this might be a good stopping point. I am way over on time as far as it is. So if anybody wants to take a break, I know there was some schedule shuffling. So if Pat will let me, I'm going to keep rolling for a little bit. But if anybody wants to take a break.
We are kind of cutting into the break, so if you want to take a break, you could go take a break. You could go, what, a few more minutes?
Yeah, I can go at least maybe 10 or so.
So it's up to you, whatever you want to do. And then I'd like to fit in a couple of questions at the end.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
If you could kind of go.
So, at this point, I'm starting to wonder, if there's going to be a country that pops up and uses a consumer drone on their flag. And if you don't understand that, Mozambique actually has the AK-47 on their flag. So the other side of this coin is people like to push the fact that drones are used for good. And if you look at some of the folks from DJI, they have no problem telling you that, hey, we've seen 59 lives saved this year or in this incremental time frame and whatnot. And there's even reports on it that point out that there's been 1 life per week saved on average with drones. So I'm honestly wondering, this geofence that they implemented, like how many lives did that save? Like I feel like that probably saved a couple, so to speak. The numbers that we see coming out of Iraq, they may not be necessarily clear. There was one comment. This is probably just the local forces boasting, as it will, but they had claimed that 859 militants had been killed by weaponized drones or quadcopters. And we've all got to understand that a certain percentage of those would likely be DJI gear. Somebody else had pointed out maybe that was 85.9 or 8 or 5 or 9, and those numbers are in question. But if you look at the propaganda that these guys are putting out, you'll see in this particular one that was from February 2nd through February 4th, there were 14 deaths, 25 injuries, and 14 vehicles damaged. And they're implying that they've done this with drones in this case. Here's another one, a little bit different time frame. Looks like February 11th through February 27th. In this case, 79 people either killed or injured via drone. So this is, I think, one of the last ones, and they're pointing out that more than 81 air bombings. So this is really like a neck and neck kind of race as far as the advertising for who's got the better drones for good or drones for bad goes. So it's kind of like hang on to your hats and keep an eye on those numbers. Place your bets. If you look on Twitter, you'll see folks from DJI commenting on how geofencing can successfully protect people in certain instances. In this specific tweet, it was about the inauguration when Trump was in town. Another DJI employee pipes up and says that it would be difficult to do this in Mosul because of the NGOs that are there. It's easy to say that it could be done, but in reality, it's actually a difficult thing. So again, that's an interesting line of commentary when you look at the fact that that's coming out of somebody from DJI's PR department. In particular, somebody that's noted for saying things like, this particular drone was not made by DJI when, a reporter contacts them about things that are going on, or pipes up and says that, their products are entirely made for peaceful purposes and that they deplore any attempts to do anything else with them. So as David Kovar has pointed out, and like I just discussed, this is kind of the common line of commentary about why certain war zones couldn't be geofenced in the past. And again, if you look at today, they've actually already done that. So again, the conversation is kind of interesting as a whole. And the reason I think is partially because not only would it impact the NGOs, but there are other people, the quote good guys, that are using this stuff that would be impacted as well. So it's a difficult conversation. If you search back to that Lord of War movie clip, I feel like there's somebody selling just piles of these Matrix 100s to the point to where they're offering deals for buying them in bulk. DJI's approach to this stuff is to, like I said, strongly condemn it, as opposed to using their technological measures, which can actually prevent some of this stuff. They piped up and they've said that they have the ability to geofence locations temporarily. They've also piped up and said that they have actually used geofencing historically to discourage the use of phantoms on the battlefield. I didn't really find much evidence of that specifically. In particular, when you mentioned the NGO issue that they always use, I'd feel like more NGOs would have piped up already, and it wouldn't be breaking news that I mentioned that they were already doing this. Nonetheless, I also thought it was funny that they mentioned one reason that they have a problem with geofencing is the fact that the Phantoms don't have military-grade encryption. The reality is people are bypassing this stuff with aluminum foil. It's not really at the military-grade encryption type of problem. It's a farce. The whole thing is a farce as far as I'm concerned. And if you look at the actual data, where the geofence database is created, you can see exactly when they chose to take action in the region, as it were. And this column that I have highlighted is actually a timestamp. And that timestamp shows that on February 25th, they opened a bunch of these no-fly zones. So to hear them say that they had historically already tried to discourage the use of their equipment in the region, but to actually look at the data and see that it appears they only did it on February 25th, it just brings some things into question. I tried to comb those data sets. Maybe somebody can look a little harder and show otherwise, but that's what it looked like to me. I had historically said that the only battlefield that they've used geofencing on is honestly Tiananmen Square. And if you looked at their previous web interface, you can actually see that Iraq wasn't even lit up on that web interface. I found out later they had a separate web interface that will show you that it is lit up. So if you go back recently, there was a Senate hearing, and some staff from DJI piped up and said that the reason they created geofencing was that they were anticipating these issues at airports. The reality is it was Tiananmen Square. It had nothing to do with airports, and you can look in the search engines and find that stuff for yourself. This again, so I'm not specifically misquoting anybody, that was a Senate hearing that you can watch, and you can see exactly what was said about why geofencing was created. It's funny, again, in hindsight, as I mentioned, social norms do tend to change. And this is somebody from DJI staff about 4 years ago commenting on Tiananmen Square. At this point, this was before this person happened to work for DJI, so it's kind of funny. The whole was this for airports or was this for Tiananmen Square question was actually addressed by former DJI employees. And you can watch the videos where Colin Gwynn discusses that with somebody openly about why they added the Tiananmen Square geofence. So people have pointed out that this is really, it's been a double standard. Why can you geofence Tiananmen Square, but you can't geofence a war zone? So obviously at this point, DJI has shown that they can do that. They just choose not to talk about it openly for whatever reason. So again, if you look in the region, it's pretty clear that this equipment is used there, and the morality of should the geofence be enabled seems kind of obvious when you discuss it. And it's interesting looking at quotes coming out of the area from people that are actually dealing with this stuff. This is an individual that's clearly a soldier of some sort, and he's holding up a DJI aircraft that was shot down recently, and the comment that is he has no problem dealing with shooting, but stuff dropping on him is extremely difficult. So that's kind of sobering to hear that. And this is kind of one of those, like, I feel like I should pipe up and say, like, stop double dipping, like, really, like, get your hands out of my chips and my dip, and we should pipe up as a community. This isn't right. And again, forgive my French for a moment here, but I'm going to read the quote out of this article. This individual says, "They're not just using a fixed location. It's one shithead on a motorbike with a backpack." I don't think any one of us in here would want to play whack-a-mole with a guy with a drone with a grenade on it and you have no clue where they are. But that's reality for some people right now. And it almost feels like a Terminator movie to me if I think about it. A shithead, a backpack, and, a Terminator. So, again, DJI pipes up and says directly that restricting the use of drone technology based on geographic location alone is not a good solution to the concerns that have recently been raised. So, again, I know a lot of people, Part 107 pilots, folks that actually have authorization to specific areas, are very frustrated with their inability to work through the geo system and get it to work in their favor. So it just brings up a lot of questions about the system, I think. And I feel like, you can either give up on it or you can try to escape. But it's literally a cat and mouse game. It's always going to be there. Or just give up so you can get away from it all. Let the pilots do what they want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I'm going to show one more thing here. A lot of people are getting desperate, obviously. If you haven't seen recently, somebody has actually shot a Patriot missile at a drone. So I feel like that's really kind of the highlighted desperation there. So I'm going to skip over the last part of this here. Got like 2 more slides here. Yeah, so what's the point of this? What am I actually trying to say? Okay. I have a lot of people that razz me over the fact that I'm in a counter UAS program. I'm a pilot. I obviously enjoy my aircraft, so does everybody else here. But I don't have any qualms about bringing up the fact that there's some things that we really need to think about as a community and try to figure out a better solution to, instead of just deleting people's comments and turning a blind eye. And if we don't, I feel like we're going to kind of be in that Terminator movie here real soon. And if you don't know what this is a mode Terminator, and the video of it's linked in the slide, but this thing winds up driving around and it's autonomous and it's got guns and it's scary, and we don't want to be there. But the reality is I don't think we're really that far off. And if you look at some of the patents recently, DJI actually has a patent for detecting projectile hits on a surface. And I don't think it takes a genius to realize that can be dual use technology. I thought it was funny in the patent they specifically point out that this may be in a game, and it may be within a facility. It may be on a war zone too. So a lot of people have also recognized that the new DJI MG1S is definitely not for dispersing chemical weapons, which I thought was kind of a funny comment. And for me, that's one of those things like, yeah, guys, geofence the heck out of that thing, please, and do it properly, because I don't want to see that somewhere malicious. So again, this is an extremely hard problem. I don't know what the solution is, but I think it's something that we should be able to openly discuss with each other without being censored. And for me, about the only way that I know to do that is kind of disrupt the status quo. So that's all I got for you guys. My business card is linked in the slide, and at the end is a video for the information about how our counter drone technology works at Department 13. So that's all I have for you guys. Thank you.
Oh, don't run off yet, because we're going to take questions.
Questions.
Okay, hold on though, because I have the first question. That's kind of the beauty of putting on a show. You get to ask the first question. So, now this linking back and the registration and all of that, and people have been talking about data security. If they can track it back to the person that bought it through the supply chain, and I've noticed in the in my instructions there are disclaimers that say some of your data may be used, your name, pictures, blah blah blah. Is it possible that they're collecting data on their servers in conjunction with the geofencing? And
I think their standard line is that they are not collecting some of that data. I think with modern computer systems and the way that stuff's interconnected, there's no way that they can't be collecting some of that data, even if it's passively. And there was actually an incident about a year or so ago where a security researcher pointed out that there were a number of SQL injection issues on DJI servers. And that's a security issue that will allow people to get into a database and exfiltrate the data. So think about that. If there's data archived somewhere, somebody may be able to exfiltrate it, obviously.
Kevin, that was awesome.
Thank you.
And I've got two questions.
Sure.
Are you telling us all that Chris Anderson did not invent the drone? And number two, I thought Brendan Schulman was the director of the FAA.
I love the fact that somebody has trolled the troll. I'm going to refrain from comment on both of those.
all right, hold on over here. Ladies first.
So it seems to me that the major responsibility that's dropped here is from the Chinese government and their export control program.
And that's, I think, kind of the loophole that's being used. That's exactly it. Part of the reason that you're not seeing more 3D robotics gear in theater is because of those export restrictions. And the stuff that you are seeing, I suspect, are clones of the open source. And I've always wondered, and I'm not a lawyer and I don't know about how the semantics of export restrictions work, but I've got to imagine that DJI has a lot of US-based assets and US employees and stuff like that. So I don't know at what point that crossover starts getting murky, but yeah, you're entirely correct. I think that is the loophole that's being used, and that's why I feel like social norms are one of few ways that we can kind of influence that, is by speaking up and saying that we think it should change.
Yeah, definitely. But it also begs the question of why can't the U.S. government, particularly BIS, Bureau of Industry and Security, who's responsible for U.S. export controls and does a lot of research on non-proliferation right here in Monterey. Mm-hmm. They've got a very sophisticated non-proliferation program. They should be putting pressure on the Chinese government to up their ante on the export controls.
I fully agree, and I haven't looked historically as good as I should, but that document that I put on early from the GAO, there was a Chinese Sidewinder missile or something like that in the photo that was actually in Iraq, and they were discussing some of the historic problem that's already came up. So yeah, I think you're entirely correct that
and the corporations here, we're responsible for denied party screening and for knowing where our manufactured products are going to end up and in whose hands they're going to end up. And DJI should be, or other companies that are similar should be taking that responsibility
We are
as
on
well.
the same page.
But they need to be forced to do it by
Yeah, if you've got a
government.
loophole that you can exploit, traditionally people will exploit it.
Absolutely.
And it is what it is.
Profit motive.
I'm glad to hear you say profit motives. I actually, the Uber gentleman that picked me up on the way here was asking who I was and what I was doing, and he's totally not even in the industry, and that was the first thing that he said was profit motive.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. So based upon what we're talking about or what you've alluded to with regard to the information, if you register your DJI drone to you, and what is being fed back to DJI. And I ask the question because of this, especially that there are so many DJI products in use with commercial and industrial applications here in the States. So where does that data ultimately reside? Does it go back to the service provider who's using that DJI drone? And this is more of an opinion piece. I don't know if there's a real ground truth on it, but it's a very interesting question to me.
So there's, I've spent a little bit of time analyzing the applications rather that DJI products interact with. And if you look on the forums, a number of people have piped up and said, hey, I'm not even doing anything with this app, but over the month that I left it open, it used 8 megs worth of data. Like, what is that? And I haven't really put together, a full spreadsheet or outline of what's going on, but I've noticed that there are, for example, some calls that go out to traditional ad tracking kind of organizations, like things that you would see gathering statistics on you as a user for geographic information so that you could be advertised, like doubleclick.net here in the States, for example. There appears to be some links that tie into Chinese equivalents of that. There's definitely some statistics gathering ability in the apps and the SDKs and things of that nature. But yeah, that's actually something I hope to have some time to dig in a little deeper and figure out where some of this stuff is going. But you've unfortunately got to have some of the tools. A lot of the connections are SSL, so you have to have tools that can man in the middle of the SSL and a lot of other stuff. But yeah, there's definitely, I think, a large data set there that is worth analyzing and looking at to figure out what is going where.
All right, thanks. That was really interesting. I'd say take it offline. Let's take a 5-minute bio
Thank you, guys.
break. Because I noticed when I said you could leave for a break, everybody stayed. But anyway, thanks, Kevin.